science being disoriented in a way is again a relatively new result. Like it's not that old. Like until the Middle Ages, people were still doing some kind of sacred science. I mean, you had sacred geometry, you had all your polymaths, especially the ones with Neoplatonic backgrounds, with mystical backgrounds. They knew what it was about. They weren't trying to get rid of the sacred. All the work was in service of it. And I think this is where the deception in today's science lies, in my opinion, which doesn't mean that there isn't good science out there. I hope people don't hear me wrong. I think it's often that good science, the sacred is implicit in it. But to create a grammar where we can not just dismiss, but really, really again take serious that which we are connected to, ultimately to the sacred, I think is something that can transform science, and for that, even humanity, if you want.
Mr. Kasra, I'm so excited to talk to you today, man. This is going to be so much fun. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Trey. It's wonderful to be with you. And I'm also
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
If you don't mind, will you give kind of just a brief introduction just to frame so people know
Yeah,
where you are in the world and what you do?
yeah, sure. So, yeah, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm also a researcher and teacher working at the university in Germany, in Hildesheim. And I would say I'm fascinated by a couple of things. I'm a very eclectic person. And I'm really fascinated by the question of meaning and how we make sense out of things and how we can connect. And I think that question and quest for meaning has brought me to different kinds of places, dabbling into lots of stuff. I have huge fanboy parts of Jung, although I wouldn't call myself a Jungian. I do honor him a lot. I am a IFS therapist, an internal family systems therapist, and also doing lots of work there. And I think that brought me into very interesting spaces like talking to John Vervaeke, which I know you know too, Trey.
Yeah.
And it was a way how we both met. And yeah, really, really having fascination and also a serious, I think I would say I take the soul and the psyche very serious, and also its spiritual and symbolic dimensions.
Yeah.
I hope that works as an introduction.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm excited to talk to you because we've talked several times, and every time we've talked, one of the things I really appreciate is the ability to kind of go into different dimensions of the psyche while staying in this grounded, centered place. And but whenever I meet people like that, I'm always really excited because I feel like it's just very dynamic in that sense. But if you don't mind, I would love, just for everybody listening, you mentioned, how we met. I would love to share that story really briefly, just to kind of frame just how all this came about, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So you mentioned Vervaeke. So about a year ago, I actually started following Vervaeke's work, and I started with I think I found an awakening from the meaning crisis somehow. I watched it. I was like, this was amazing. So I started watching his other YouTube videos, and as I started doing that, I found one of the videos with you and him talking about IFS. I found your conversation to just be so riveting is not even the right word. I was so locked in, and I was like, man, I want to be in that conversation because the stuff you guys were talking about just was so relevant to my past life, to my experience in life. And so I remember watching that video saying, I have to meet this guy. I was like, I don't know how. Like, I've got to meet this guy. Anyway, fast forward a few months, I go to bed one night and I have a dream in which I'm sitting at a table with a bunch of ladies, and they're talking about religion and the Bible and all of, cognitive like philosophy and stuff, and they're starting to basically argue with me, and they're saying, what you're saying is not God, this is heresy, you're wrong. And I wasn't really trying to argue. I was just saying, no, like, here's the science behind this and this and that. And I look over and I see Dr. Vervaeke standing at the sink, and I look at him and I'm like, hey, man, help me out. I was like, I know you know this stuff. You teach this stuff. And he just kind of looked at me like I'm not helping. And then I kept going. They kept arguing. And then finally, Vervaeke puts the plate down. He walks over, whispers something in this lady's ear. She's just so irate at me. and she just stops and she's like stunned in this moment of like aporia. She's like, "Oh my gosh, like this is what's going on." And Vervaeke looks at me, he's like, "Ask her what she just saw." And I was like, "What did you see?" He said, I saw somebody named Zapidados or something, I don't know." And she's like, "I'm so sorry that I was fighting with you. Like I didn't know. I wasn't seeing clearly. And now I'm seeing something that I didn't see before." And I looked back at John and he said, "You have to realize the power of the imaginal." And I woke up and I was like, "Wow, what a powerful dream." And I was like, and it was relevant because that's what I'm doing my PhD stuff on. And so I got my cup of coffee, I sat down and I was like writing down the dream. And I checked my email and I looked at my email and I had a message from Vervaeke's newsletter that I had just subscribed to. And he had just announced a brand new class that he was teaching. I've never signed up for an online class or for anything. And I was scrolling down and I looked at the name of the class that had just been announced, and it was realizing the realizing the imaginal. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, is insane. Like I've got to take this class obviously." And so I ended up signing up for the class, and I think the class was in like 2 or 3 months, and I was so excited. Show up in the Zoom room and I was like waiting and I started scrolling around on all the little boxes, and then right in the middle I see your face. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And I didn't know what to do because I was like, I wanted to just mess. And I was like, "All right, I don't want to be a weirdo." So I was like trying to figure out, but somehow we started talking in the Zoom. And then we ended up meeting on, we ended up scheduling a time to talk, and it was just really good. So I look at all of those synchronicities as just being very powerful for me. And I just feel like this all has kind of been orchestrated by something beyond what I could have what I could have imagined. That was that was a really powerful thing for me.
Well, yeah, I think that was really powerful, and thank you for sharing this. I know it's to me dreams are very intimate. Like speaking for that in a public space, like kudos. And it's, I mean, those moments of synchronicity, right? They're just like mind blowing.
Yeah, and I think that's what I really want to talk to you about today is stuff is like, the idea of the psychotechnologies, these dream work and parts work and these archetypal forms. And I feel like to me they're so they're so pivotal in how I approach life. I mean, it's everything really, because I think like what you're saying, the vulnerability of it all. There's so much information in the world. There's so much stuff going on that being able to have access into those spaces and being able to actually tune in to kind of what you were, what is leading you, a force that's kind of like beyond the ego or beyond just like, oh, this would be a good idea, or this would be fun, into this synchronistic life.
Yeah, totally. I feel you. I think it's very similar for me as well. I think once you've tasted sacredness and those other realms beyond the purely physical ones, I think it's hard not to check with them. It feels like incomplete to me if I don't move into that space just to get it, even if it's a very pragmatic thing in real life. What I often feel like I try to make sure I look at that very simple and pragmatic thing, even from that perspective, so I get this holistic view. So in a way, really feel what you're saying. It feels incomplete without.
Yeah, trying to think the best place to start here, because I mean, there's so many different areas and places to explore. Because I'm interested in essentially maybe grounding this from IFS and starting from just the practical tools of what your version of I or how you view IFS. And I think that is important because what I've realized is that depending on who you talk to and how they view IFS, it's can be practiced very differently. And so I think maybe starting with that framing of as a therapist, as an IFS practitioner, how do you view it, and what mindset do you go into it with, if that makes sense?
Well, how to address that IFS? So I think I'm practicing IFS now for 7 or 8 years, and honestly, Trey, I feel like now I'm just making sense out of it. Like I feel just that just now I'm starting to get it. And I'm sure I'm wrong. I'm sure when I look at that, like in 10 years, I'll have totally new revelations around IFS and say, well, I didn't know anything about IFS. So again, maybe, I don't know, maybe the audience is familiar, maybe it isn't, maybe it's, valuable to just sum it up a little bit. So IFS is the abbreviation for internal family systems therapy, which is a modality that was developed by Richard Schwartz, I think in the 80s. And basically he was listening and attuning to the inner world and language. Although he was a family therapist, like working with external family systems, he attuned to the inner world of his clients and adapted that language and really paying attention to them using parts language. Like, for example, with the eating disordered people and saying that part of me wants to adhere to the diet and blah blah blah, but another one wants to purge, and then he really paid attention and he just followed the data, and that, well, brought him to this, creating together with other people, creating a protocol, making it, I think, a very very powerful language for, I would say again, very accessible language for mapping inner experiences. That's what I would say what IFS is and where its potency lies. It's very accessible. It is simple, yet not easy. And it maps very well onto typical folk phenomenological language, like things that people just understand without the necessity to do very, very sophisticated intellectual theorizing, which we often have in, in psychodynamics and stuff. And in a way, well, the experience is when you do IFS, so when you're able to dialogue with your parts and you attune to them and listen to them and understand that they hold pearls and wisdom that we usually don't have access to through our consciousness, it's immensely rewarding and at times absolutely healing.
Yeah.
And I think that makes IFS very, very powerful.
Yeah, it's like it's baked into the grammar of culture. I think when we listen to people talk, they're normally already familiar with part of me wants to stay in, or that's it's like, oh, there's a part of me that doesn't want to do this. That's not a big step. Even within the grammar, it's already there. So I do appreciate it for that because it's something that I think in order to push into, and I like what you said because I think one of the errors is to define IFS and say this is what it is. I mean, obviously you could have like the official IFS, but this is something that I feel as well within my work, I'm not IFS certified, or I'm not really going that route. Not because I don't think it would be beneficial, just because like where I'm focused is like looking at the maybe the gestalt or the overall imaginal landscape, especially from like a Jungian perspective. Because a lot of it, what I've seen is like seems like it's an updated version of Jung's lexicon, and obviously there's some discrepancies in the ways that itself is talked about and all of that, but for the most part, it gives people access to that. Now, at the same time, I think that it's like there's that trade off of the simplification for the access might also have a framing that it's like a parasitic processing type framing that will eventually trap you if you let it, or if you don't go beyond it. And so I find that tension there of like, oh, what is that? Where does that go? And so for me, it's like I think the best that I've been able to frame it for myself is the imaginal landscape. I don't know how else to push beyond it while still kinda operating within that world, but I do get the sense of, like, what you're saying.
Yeah. Um, well, I do think it's a child of these predecessors like Jungian therapy and theory. In a way, it is mind boggling how accessible it is without the necessity for theorizing too much. And well, what is right and what people even in the IFS Institute know, and they also speak for, fortunately, is that we need more research on IFS. It's a very young modality and model. I think the power of IFS, and this is actually what I like, it doesn't actually try to play that game too much because it's so experiential that sometimes without knowing why it can transform. And I feel like this is the power of it. It's an absolutely experiential model. I think this is why it is so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like it to me it's beginning to give language back to the archetypal grammar that I think is missing from culture, or at least in Western culture. I've noticed that there is a lack of the ability to even have access into talking about these things in a way that connects with some of the modern science, or without seeming to go backwards in thought, being able to remain authentic to what we know, but then also accessing some of these future spaces of what are the new ways that we can begin to talk about some of these modalities, and how they might extend even beyond what we are aware of about it.
Well, let's just say this. I think if Jung was alive, he would have liked IFS. He would have approved. So, and I think even the senior trainers, the ones that have so much self energy and wisdom through years and years of practicing and experiencing and dealing with their own systems as well as the systems of others, and especially in group settings, I think it is part of that grammar to tap into the imaginal. So I think they go very well together.
Yeah. And now I'm curious, what is most interesting, or where are you finding your attention going these days of pushing into, like, this is what I've been deeply curious about or playing with lately?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The question and quest for meaning brought me into this field of, exploring and being curious around what it means to be connected, internally connected, connected to something ultimate, but also socially connected. And nowadays, I'm more and more drawn towards this idea of social cohesion and group fields
Mm,
and group spaces, and especially the aspect of the mind not being that monolithic thing, the mono mind that we're having, but the porous mind that we're having, the extended mind that we're having, going away from singular selves to, well, we are the field. And I think this is the thing that fascinates me at the moment the most. Like the idea of, well, we have some kind of semi-permeable membrane of a psyche that is able to connect horizontally and vertically in a way. Like with your ancestors and with all the legacy stuff, and also on a horizontal level, like with
yeah.
other people today, back then, and in the future. So there's also this temporal aspect to it. But I would say, yeah, the extended mind hypothesis and idea, the idea of a porous mind, porous psyche, and that we are the group in a way, and that our energy just is connected and flows into the group's field and energy too. I think that's the one that, well, fascinates me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like what you said about the idea of the vertical and the horizontal on that, because I think it's easy to contextualize that or to picture that as far as the horizontal, or as far as like connecting with the world that we see, but also the transcendent, like these higher archetypal forms and the cellular forms, like connecting in that way as well. And not just that, but memory and time becomes part of that equation too, because like I had this thought the other day, and IFS is actually tied in with this, but like if you think about the way that most people operate, we're operating from patterns, we're operating from parts that have been conditioned a certain way. And it's almost like, and I'd be curious as to what you think of this, because I was listening to something on, I think it was Luther or Descartes or whatever, and I was like, just thinking so much about how you see these patterns and these forms that were either presented or showed up in a way that then began to permeate throughout the time and begin to influence and live in bodies and live in thoughts and ideas and like be expressed through us. And it's almost like the process of becoming aware and the seeing the different parts is like not just seeing parts of like what's showing at present, but like understanding their connection throughout time. It's like digging into time and going to the core of like, actually, this energy that is living within me is very old. It's like goes back. And it's like, so then you start going into this place of like, wow, I've got to dig into the core of these archetypal forms throughout time in order to essentially, in a way, be free of them, or to transcend it, or to not just operate from the like just this automatic repeating of that pattern. I know I said a lot and I kind of didn't clarify that, but it was just
That's
something
fine.
that I was thinking about that with like similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think you're saying something very, very important here and pivotal. I know for me, key moment in my life, and I guess I'm still trying to make sense out of that, but understanding that we are really old changed my worldview. And again, Jung already talked about that. He knew we were not just of yesterday, but really understanding it also even now science catching up with that kind of ancient wisdom, which is like funny in a way,
Yeah.
but understanding that we are this successful product of an unbroken chain of life flowing through us, all the ancestral lines flowing through us, all the things happening in the world, again, horizontally and vertically, like on multiple levels, and even on realms that may defy those very intellectual concepts of time that we are giving in a physical sense, like something about the psyche in those realms defies our understanding of time. I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying it's not that time is there, but maybe it's a different kind of time we are experiencing. Um, really makes you think different about human nature and that very, very ancient human condition experience that we all carry.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think how those forms are just so so living in a lot of different ways. Going back to that the need for grammar because it's like what you're saying with as science begins to open up new like with Levin's work or with even what Vervaeke's talking about and some of these people it's like I think it's becoming more and more of the rational position to really talk about these things in a very what's the word I'm looking for? Serious manner. It's like
Yeah,
the need
exactly.
for, the need for grounded science, but not just science, like rational discourse of cultivating this cultural grammar. And I think that that's like in a lot of ways it's like I see that missing and I don't know what that looks like, I don't know how that starts to come together, and I don't know I'm sure it's probably something that begins to unfold organically in a sense, but nevertheless, it's like I think as we're presented, especially with consciousness studies, the crazier it gets, the more necessary it becomes to give that pragmatic grammar in order to explore and really
Yeah,
encounter this stuff.
totally. And I think it is absolutely reasonable to take that serious. I think it's necessary in a way because I mean, again, reports are there telling you people talking about these experiences. Like not it would be foolish to assume that like everyone is just psychotic. Well, no. You can have these experiences and still be quite sane. I would say even in a way that contributes to your sanity in a way that Western world and modern people have no clue of when they talk about sanity. Like maybe it's even an extended understanding of healing and it brings that extension brings new, probably even ancient, to be honest, again into that play. So again, I think it would be foolish to deny that, to reduce them, and I think it's well reasonable to take that again, the phenomenology of people, the subjective. I mean, it's not purely subjective, but those experiences of people serious in creating a language that can account for it and be fair to it. Like I think we've done a good job in science to create a language from that fits the third person perspective. And now we're encountering again that, well, we cannot just leave out the phenomenology, the first person perspective. It counts. Like the observer is part of the system. The observer is part of the field too. And I think this is one of the reasons why dialogue is so powerful because it is able to bridge those, right?
Yeah.
And well, yeah, again, I think it would be foolish to deny that. And I think it's quite reasonable to assume there is a kind of realness to that.
Yeah, and it's hard. I'm finishing my PhD right now, and I always seem to be in this war with quantitative. Like everything is always like I appreciate quantitative, but in all of my research endeavors, I'm just constantly looking at the presupposed assumptions that are built in to how we're looking at quantitative data. Like when they try to like dichotomously separate these things or create these categorical imperatives on things that you're like, okay, well, the premise of what we're even starting here needs to be looked at because the way that I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. And a lot of what I experience is the amount of digging or reflecting or contemplation or spiritual practice, or like a way of what a person would need to do to be able to access those ways of knowing, those participatory
Yeah.
perspective ways of knowing. It seems as though a lot of people, those haven't been afforded. Like they just haven't been
Yeah.
in those spaces. And so to be able to like see the sensibility of it requires more than the intellect. It requires more than just
Yeah.
looking at the data. It requires the lived practice. It's very with the way the system's set up now is I do feel it's
Yeah.
very rare to have people that are going to be able to shift into those modes. And I think Vervaeke actually does that really well, which is why I think he's been able to reach kind of a level and an explanation of things that is very, I believe, unique to this
Yeah.
time and seminal though in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
I like what you're saying, Trey. I think there is a lot of wisdom in quantitative stuff. It's one way how we're kept grounded in a way. It's one way how it connects us to reality. I think there is merit and wisdom in quantitatives. But assuming that it's just that, it's just what we need, again, I think would be foolish. We do need the qualitative reports in a way that is not less valuable. We often think of qualitative data as that's like this exactly.
It's
Right?
like right
Exactly the
below it.
move you
Yeah.
just made. Exactly.
Yeah.
Both going hand in hand, I think they can be very powerful. And I think science needs that. And my dear friend and colleague Ann-Kathrin Bockmann, she talks about a way of conducting science, which I love. And I respect her a lot. And she talks about in an IFS language, she calls it self-led research, which I think is very, very akin to and maps well onto that ancient notion of sacred science. Like, let's not forget, science is grounded in a belief system itself. Like, you cannot do science without the things that science presupposes, which are also the transcendentals. Well, if you do science and you don't think, if you do not presume that there is some kind of truth, well, I think you're in self-deception. You're deluded.
Yeah. Right. Well, but that goes back to the what we were talking about with the memories of time, like I think this happens in religion as well. I look at like evangelical Protestant Christians today that have a lot of patterns and beliefs, but yet have no idea as to the legacy of those patterns. They have no idea the legacy of where they come from. And I think with even within many of the academic spaces that I see, I think because we've been so compartmentalized into subject matter experts and different fields, having the ability to understand the philosophical, the psychological, the spiritual, like it's not really that common. And so I see that as also very limiting when it's like, okay, well, here's the people that are running science, but yet it's not in an ecology of fields. It's not connected to all of the topics, which I think they need each other in order to produce the best science. Because if you look at the Greeks, it's like that's what they were doing, right? They were looking at dreams, they were looking at physics, they were looking at biology, they were looking at
Well,
all
and
of it
so did
together.
Einstein. And so did Einstein. Like, he'd never be able to formalize his theories without his capability to tap into the imaginal world. Again, the imaginal is even at the ground of science. Like, it builds on that.
Like what you were saying, it's built on stuff that people just maybe ignore or they say they don't think about like all of
Yeah.
the things all of the things that were afforded to this in order for it to be a reality, and yet those aren't given any acknowledgement in that sense. And I don't know what that looks like to break that up. Like I don't know how that shifts, and but I do feel like that is when you talk about meaning, waking up to this is like I think that paradigm being broken is a really important part of it.
Yeah, and I think science being disoriented in a way is again relatively new result. Like it's not that old. Like until the Middle Ages, people were still doing some kind of sacred science. I mean, you had sacred geometry, you had all your polymaths, especially the ones you know with Neoplatonic backgrounds, with mystical backgrounds. They knew what it was about. They weren't trying to get rid of the sacred. All the work was in service of it. And I
Yeah.
think this is where the deception in today's science lies, in my opinion, which doesn't mean that there isn't good science out there. I hope people
No,
don't
no, yeah.
hear me
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's often that good science, the sacred is implicit in it.
Absolutely.
But to create a grammar where we can not just dismiss, but really again take serious that which we are connected to, ultimately to the sacred, I think is something that can transform science and for that even humanity, if you want. Like we need science.
Yeah, well, and this, I like the idea of the sacred science, and I think there's a wrong way and there's a right way and a wrong way of doing it, right? You could take the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds, and there it's a double edged sword that way because I think you have to know, like what you were saying, the benefits and the service of what each one of them are bringing in order to allow them to be complementary, and I see that as being something like we were talking about intuition. We were talking about, I think consciousness is probably one of the biggest things that is not just problematic at the moment, but necessary to, I think it's like when I think of the things that we can do, the Cartesian graphing, the mappings, the mathematical hard science, it's like we can, I think we were under the illusion. It's like, oh, well, we can do all this stuff without the embodiment, without the infusion of the sacred. But I feel like once we've reached the levels of the quantum mechanics or like trying to understand consciousness, now we've kind of reached that level of like, well, yeah, like I don't know. It seems like
Well, I agree, and I think that the thing we call the heart problem of consciousness is just a hard problem from the perspective of, well, Western tradition with its own legacy
mm,
being in a disembodied, thinking disem- in a disembodied way. Yeah, well, only then it's a hard problem, right? So I think understanding there is again ancient wisdom around that and resurrecting that um can could be quite powerful.
I think a lot about the experiences that I've had and the environment in which a lot of science is done, or the rigor that's required, which is on one hand necessary and good, and I think allows us to really stay grounded and it really stays as clean as possible. But I also like think that there's very problematic challenges that arise when we're coming at it from a place of like, okay, think about the things that a person has to do in order to get into a space where they'll be able to put together these studies or go through the peer reviewed process or collect, even pragmatically, when I think about IFS or working with unattached burdens, working with people, the sacredness of the environment that has to, like the trust, all of the things that have to be cultivated. I think about the accessibilities of MRIs with brain scans and some of these altered states, just the pragmatic challenges and just the tools in which, or the awareness of what we're looking for and the training of what we're looking for. Because I mean, if you look at mystical traditions, it's like these people didn't just wake up and say, "This is what I want to do," or the shamans, they weren't just like, "Oh, I'm a shaman today." It's like that was a lifelong path into an experience of how to engage with the world. And so I think just when we look at that logistically and pragmatically, academic spaces are always going to kind of, in many ways, remain limited in that perspectile, like that participatory knowledge, because it's like being in those spaces is really, it's really hard to go into both spaces, is what I'm trying to say. Like, there's not a ton of people that I've met, especially working with like archetypal energies or unattached burdens other than, Bob Falconer, being able to really throw out accounts of like, hey, here is the data that I've collected, through different case studies. Here's and also a deep understanding of the legacies and the traditions and the history. It's like um, those worlds. It's like it's like, again, I think blending those worlds is very problematic and very challenging, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And especially those, you were referring to those mystics. And I would say we all have mystic ones inside of us. Like we have parts. And I would say the best scientists are children because the spirit of science is in wonder and curiosity,
Mm,
wandering around, encountering, and, having open eyes for wonder to happen and being curious. I think that's what science is. Everything else is just systematicity. Well,
yeah,
science, of course, needs system. Yeah, I think I do, however, also see a momentum here and things starting to change because I do see, especially the notion of relationality coming to the forefront more and more in science, in medicine, philosophy, which again, parts of me want to say, well, that's the right move. We're finally trying, we're finally understanding that we need to take relationships as serious as we've taken matter
yeah.
and substance.
And I'm gonna assume you're speaking of a deeper relationship than just between people, right?
Well, exactly. I would say relationality. I mean, relationships, we can have relationships towards basically anything. I don't think there's anything without relationships. We can have
Right.
internal relationships. We can have relationships towards, transjective and transpersonal spaces. And obviously relationships to other human beings, which I wouldn't underestimate. Like the longest study done, the best longitudinal study done by scientists in Harvard came up with the single best predictor for well-being, which is social connections. Like we shouldn't underestimate that. There's something about social connections, and again, that group space and group field that I was talking about.
Yeah.
It can be both. It is both a product of the internal world, but it can also be internalized in a way and brought into the inner world. And yeah, relationality in multiple dimensions and different directions. Yeah, Trey. I
Yeah,
think
I
that.
had Dylan Francisco from Pacifica on, and we were talking about the animistic paradigms and worldviews, and I think that there is a huge resistance by in the main zeitgeist. Just the words probably associated with primitive or some there is a big resistance there, but I think when you really start digging into what it actually is and what it's talking about and just the history of that within bodies and in cultures and in life, it's like it starts to make a lot of sense watching it come back watching it come back full circle. And I'm curious to see how that gets adopted into our current framing. Maybe it's not called, maybe we don't speak of it as animism, maybe we do. But I see once it's framed and really explained, it's like, oh, this is actually much different than how most people are probably perceiving an animistic worldview or animistic paradigm to be, as opposed to what you're talking about, which has the imaginal and the symbolic and I think the expansiveness already kind of baked into what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, and I think animism in a way is a logical consequence of and the result of when you take the imaginal serious and relationality serious. And again, Trey, I think we need to make clear that getting rid of that is a Western legacy. Not entirely Western, of course. I mean, there are just other places too, but to understand that most of the history of human beings in different cultures, they took that animistic tradition serious as well and let that flow through their understanding of self and world makes you think of, well, okay, well, now we're getting back to the roots again. So in the Western world. So we should be aware of, again, the legacy around that, also with all the colonializations and
Oh, yeah.
how we just messed up
Yeah.
those indigenous spaces as well, right? So, and again, I think that is even compatible again with the Jungian approach. I mean, Jung himself, he was a huge, I would say he was a student of Scheele, who basically is one of those fathers of nature philosophy, which has a huge overlap with animism. So, well, in a way, as weird it is as it is to speak to a tree, in a way, it is absolutely foolish not to do it, right?
Yeah.
And is in a way more natural than we might think, you know, assuming that we basically spent 2/3 of human history on trees and in relationship with trees as some kind of um, uh, human apes, just a transformed version of a human ape. I would say, well, maybe the relationship to a tree is a sacred one.
Yeah. Yeah. And just what it shapes. It's like, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, gosh, it's like you could go so deep into it as to what it shapes in the ecology around you and what it affords to you, what it gives you, like that reciprocal relationship. That's already taking place no matter how we view a tree, no matter how we view anything, all of the things around you are taking place, and they're impacting one another. That enmeshment is such a natural, automatic, like there's no way around it. You are going to have to be in a relationship with everybody. And I think what you're saying is spot on, where it's like I think the West has tried to compartmentalize this and make it to where we can create this illusion that we can put stuff in another room and not look at it, and or have this illusion of control or power over our environment or over land, and we think that's like, okay, we've conquered it, and then really it's just, being pushed in the corner. It's kind of like with the subconscious and with the projections. It's like we think that we can avoid these archetypal energies and forms by not believing them or not engaging with them or not participating with any of the stuff we're talking about. But the reality of it is none of it goes away. Like it's all going to be, interwoven. So with what you were saying, it's like, yeah, not engaging in that dialogue, or at least in exploring or investigating what is afforded to you by talking, by speaking, by acknowledging the tree, the ecosystem you're in, acknowledging the parts of yourself, acknowledging the past forces. Yeah, it's like I agree with you. It's like as crazy as it might sound if you've never experienced, like it's so much once you start unpacking, it's so much crazier not to.
It is, and I wanted to say that, yeah, I like what you said. I think one of the ways to measure if this is real, our relationship to a tree is more real than, well, to assume that this is some kind of schizophrenia or whatever, is does it provide you with meaning? And people report over and over again that when they are in a certain relationship, let's just stick with the tree for a moment, that they feel more connected and that their life has been enhanced. So to me, that is quite a good proxy and marker of reality. And I mean, just the assumption already that there is us and nature is already again a disconnection. And I would say again a Western legacy. Like, no, there is not a distinction. To again to remember that we are nature
Right.
and that we're
Yeah.
part of it is such a huge deal. And that we just, like the enlightened idea that we can dominate nature, right? Well, I've learned, and I would say not only in my own personal experience, but also with clients and people around me, is that when you fight nature, you will lose. Like, no way you're going to win because you're fighting yourself, A, and B, you can at best leverage it. And that already has this undertone of some kind of dominating it when I'm saying leverage. I mean by leveraging I mean to this is what you would call acceptation, right? In cognitive science you would call it acceptation, but I would say to participate in nature. Well, we are servants of life. We are life, and I think part of the human condition is to cultivate life force and let life run through us and through everything we do, and really really caring about if these seeds that we're putting into that soil are starting to sprout and create
Mm.
blossoms and flowers. I think this is where human experiences flourishes, and this is where people report to be the best versions of themselves.
Yeah. Two things came to mind when you said that. I was thinking of something Terrence McKenna said in a lecture once, where he was talking about just evolution. He was talking about nature, and he's like, things within nature biologically don't survive by conquering, the survival of the fittest. Like we don't actually that's actually very incorrect. Like things actually survive by making themselves interdependable. Like if you make yourself indispensable, now the environment around you depends on you to exist and to flourish. And so you're plugged in. And when you said that, I thought about that is a form of agapic. That is a form of
Exactly.
agape, because it's life, it's a service to, and it is a life-giving paradigm in which now we can make, and I don't think it's just agapic and make humans out of things. Like I think that is a power that it has, but I also think it's making it's the life force. I think that's what I think you're right. I think with what you said, it's not just about human consciousness. It's deeper. It's a life force towards
Well,
everything.
yeah, yeah, I would say, I like how you made that transfer into the Platonic ideas, by the way. I see it as a web of relationships. Again, the web of relationality. Well, if you think you can conquer and dominate, what you just do is you twist the fabric of reality, and it
Mm,
will snap back in a way. And I think part of wisdom is understanding that we aren't just hermetically isolated from that. We are part of this web of relationships, inwardly, in the outer world, horizontally, vertically, and with that, opening up that anagogic space, that upward spiral, I would say,
yeah.
to different kinds of levels.
Yeah, it's, participating. That is interesting too, because it starts to make you wonder, what then are we participating in on those multiple levels? It's like we're trying to think of how to word this, because if again, if we stay within that archetypal framework, and we, these cognitive light cones of awareness or impact, then I'm curious as to, like, as our awareness goes up into those spaces, yeah, man, it's interesting to think about as to what the participatory role is, not just within the environment or the horizontal spaces, but in the vertical spaces. Because if we think, you know what I mean? Like, I think we can understand what that participation might look like, or that reciprocal relationship would look like harmoniously within nature. But I am curious as to what that looks like, and I think inevitably it will still play out in the horizontal space.
Yeah,
But I do think it's like I don't know, it's like a need
yeah,
for a more sophisticated grammar on this
yeah,
topic.
yeah. I like where this is going. And I think it's very tempting now to give a theoretical account of it or an intellectual answer. I think, well, we will see. If you do your work, if you do your inner work diligently, then they will open up. And I think these kinds of truths that, well, just don't work inferentially. You need to go through the transformation in the experiences, layer by layer,
Yeah,
just to see what's up there.
yeah, yeah. And also it makes me wonder what is selectively not disclosed for reasons that we don't know. Like, to what you're saying, I think that the unfolding of the slow process of that path is to our benefit, because
Well,
yeah.
yeah, well, I think this is one of the reasons why Socrates was put to trial. In a way, it can be confusing bringing that language down
Yeah.
if it's too fast. In a way, it can also be dangerous. Like I mean, transformation always necessitates destabilization, but well, it can either transform into something positive, but it can also deteriorate. We shouldn't forget that. That's why we should be very responsible with how we communicate our experiences and how we impose our experiences onto the world. Well, that's why I think, again, we need to be responsible with what we encounter there.
Yeah, I like that, because it's like I think of all the clients that I've worked with that maybe have been into mystical experiences or new age circles that have lacked some of the framing or the slower practices, and the dangers of getting lost in these transcendental spaces, or getting lost at those levels of definitely not embodying it, but like glimpsing, going, or even like the psychedelic renaissance that we're seeing, where people kind of go into these numinous spaces with not a lot of structure on them. And it's like exactly what you said, like trying to bring the context of those can be very dangerous for the individual, but also for other communities that might
Yeah,
pop up or emerge from
yeah. And I'm not
these.
saying it's not about talking about them. I think I'm just trying to warn. I mean, of course, there should be the freedom and the space, the brave space to talk about it. I
No, I
think
hear you.
you should just avoid formalizing it like in a rush.
Yeah, I'm 100% on that the page with you, and I think that's why a lot of the mystical traditions really do talk a lot about the disclosure of things and the policy as to how things are presented to others and sharing it, sharing it personally, and I think that is something that is there's that tension of that line of what you're mentioning of discussing things in a way that is pivotal and of the time, the spirit of the times, and being able to actually know when something is the gestation of something is ready to be made available and talked about, as opposed to just these forces just kind of coming through
Yeah,
and kind of wreaking chaos. And I think that to me, I don't know, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. It's like I do feel like that's the time we're in right now where the movement that I'm starting to sense is people that are taking both sides of the conversation seriously, beginning to have very legitimate conversations around the cultural grammar of the transcendent participation into the hordes, like that the movement. Like obviously we're not encapsulating anything. We're not, creating any definitive model on anything, but just the way in which we can begin to consciously participate in these forms or in these spaces that will allow people, because I think that's very much necessary for people to have access to that grammar again in a way that is grounded or rooted. So yeah, I mean, that's kinda why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think this is all to me, this is a part of it, it's like we just continue to have these conversations and
yeah. And I
let it
think,
unfold.
yeah, if we can speak from self and be as authentic as we can while doing that, following the logos to wherever it leads us, I've trust that whatever comes out of it is the right thing. Because I mean it's beyond my control anyways, which does mean that, well, I'm not responsible for what I'm saying. And I just wanted to comment on what you mentioned just right now is that one of the reason I'm cautious about these things is that we tend to forget that trauma is us encountering too much reality. So I think we have to be careful around that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's wise, and that's, something I think about with, I don't some of the people that I'm really close to that have been kind of going through a really transformational process and digging into the depths of some of the stuff that we're talking about and how that can be really challenging. It can be really painful and really overwhelming. And Young himself even had that experience where it was like he was had a gun in his nightstand ready to go, and if it got too much, it was like and at one point it was like this is the you either get this or you go crazy. And I think it's like there's no real good way around that, I think, when you go into these levels, depending on if you decide to or not. But that is something that, yeah, it's very real. I think it's very real for
Yeah,
anybody that
and
under the
and
spaces.
and I think, Trey, we need systems to counterbalance that. I think that's why I'm as much as I'm drawn to darkness, I also know like profundity and deepness. I also know about the necessity for keeping things light, playful, and joyful as well. And you find a tremendous amount of wisdom in profanity. And I think this is often things that people lack. And I think these are very real embodied phenomena. Like we need the body. We need a body of wisdom around us for these kinds of experiences. And I think collective field can create such a body as too, but you know, you need to have people around you that have done their work to hold that container for these kinds of experiences. And again, not forget that ultimately, if your spirituality doesn't result in some kind of playfulness, lightness, and joy in life, while being welcoming to the darkness that human condition also has and human experiences just contains, I think your spirituality, well, I don't want a piece of that spirituality. You might be off track.
Yeah. I I would agree, and I think the opponent processing of that, but the ability to uh, hold things loosely, and play with
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
While being fair and serious towards the complexity. Now, one of the things I love about, I mean, I'm sure you know about in IFS you have some kind of qualities that are representative of self, and they're often abbreviated with those 8 C's, right?
Mhm.
Compassion, confidence, creativity, connectedness, etc. And well, obviously it's just a mnemonic thing, and I'm sure there are different kinds of self qualities, but there are different C's that are often not mentioned, but very wise trainers and experienced trainers have proposed them. And one of them is complexity. One of the 10th C, which Osnat Abel, one of the lead trainers in IFS calls, is that self is able to hold complexity. And I think there is tremendous wisdom in that. Like, well, things are complex. Like just try to map for once your inner experiences. You'll see the dynamics, the relational dynamics. And the ability to be with that and hold that, well, that's a beautiful sign. That's a sign of maturity and wisdom.
Yeah, I was struck by, with the idea of play too, and I mean play, but like profanity, but joy, but like silliness, and
Yeah.
uh, it reminded me of a dream that I had a while ago where I went up in this plane and I didn't know how to fly a plane, so I was like, I'm gonna wreck. Like I was like this, and I knew as I was going up, I was like, this is I'm going to die. Like, who put me in this plane and like said I could fly this? I, essentially just resided to the fact that this was the last time, like, this is it, and I was going up, 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 and I went up, and I was like, "Okay," and, as I got higher and higher, the plane literally started to dissolve around me, and I was encountered by this infinite light. I mean, it was like what people will describe when they have near-death experiences of just that pure love, the pure white. It was, like, not even light, like, it was beyond that, and it was a never ending infinite up and down. It was like I can't even describe it. But when I entered into this light, I knew I was in this presence of, what they would call the self or the numinous, whatever. And I had this moment where I was like, "Oh man, okay, here I am. I'm in standing before God or whatever." And I was like, "What is it? What is going to be revealed to me? What insight is going to come? What deep thing is going to happen?" And I look up and I see this image start to just slowly descend towards me through this light. And I was looking at it and I was like, "Oh gosh, here it is. What is it?" And it got closer and closer. And as I began to see it, it was the NC State logo. It was a college football logo that meant, and I was like, it was like the Curb Your Enthusiasm music start, like dun
Yeah.
dun. And I was like, what? And I was like, is this a joke? What? And I woke up laughing because I was like, did I just meet the divine and then see the NC State logo? You know, this is so ridiculous. And and I had another dream in which I encountered Shiva, and I didn't even know how I knew it was Shiva, but it was Shiva, and part of me was had to go into the heart of Shiva, but it was a part of me that was in the form of the guy from The Office, Jim Halpert, and that was representing me going into Shiva, and so this dynamic play between like, and he's a jokester. He's like he doesn't take life
Well,
seriously.
Jim and Pam have a very playful relationship too, right?
Yes, and so the whole thing there, I started sitting with that idea, what you're talking about, of like this idea of the non-seriousness, but the seriousness. It's like those two things sitting together, and some of it, and obviously, is personal for me and the things that I'm kind of working through and dealing with. But I think archetypally, like just in general, the nature of is, I think, very much true. Where that access into those spaces, which is very trickstery too. Like that breaks things up, and it's a loosening and a way of holding something.
And it's also quite absurd, isn't it? Like what you just described with the curb your enthusiasm theme coming up. Like it's so funny because it's exactly absurdity is basically playing with perspectives,
Yeah.
right? It's the clash of perspectives, and that's I think this is the reason why when we talk about meaning, we also need to talk about absurdity too. And I would say there is meaning in absurdity.
Mm.
And we do have a threshold for absurdity. I think this is why humor and comedy is so important because it provides us with exactly that playing with perspectives, which obviously you can push too far and then becomes terror and horror.
Do you think that's the process of the constraint and like release, like like the absurdity is breaking of the constraints? Like we need the system that
Yeah,
constrains to give structure has to be broken, but there's like no good way other than the
yeah,
absurdity to break the structure.
yeah, I would agree. I think, yeah, I would very much agree. And in IFS, you would call IFS, by the way, a constraint releasing model. And I think I've experienced, I was just, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a client um, that had this, had a relation, it had a quarrel in a relationship and, you know, with her best friend. And we talked about how much joking was able to relieve that burden of that, that was put on that relationship. So humor has this ability to unburden in a weird way. And I think that moment of unburdening is has to do with permission. And I think permission has to do with constrained release.
Yeah.
And so I would totally agree there, Trey. I think it has to
Yeah.
do in a way it is some kind of constrained release.
Yeah, because it's necessary to have the constraint around the experience. Like you were talking about the porous self and this idea that the reality of it is the experience of observing to be differentiated, like to be able to have that perspective, it has to be separated, it has to be dual. And in order to do that, it has to be constrained. And so it's if not, there's this continual flow into like the nothingness and everythingness that requires that dynamical balancing. And so it's like I can see where it's like if you're stuck in the absurdity, then you were essentially the meaning then it's like you become too porous. Like you lose everything. Like nothing then matters because it's like it's all porous. And if you become
Yeah,
too constrained, now it's like, well, everything matters too much. And everything matters as my own thing, but that is also disconnected from the reality of being porous. So it's like you can't choose one or the other.
yeah.
You have to stay in the harmony with
I
it.
agree. I agree. And I think you definitely can become too porous. It's like when you spread the paint too thin, like when you brush
Mm,
it too thin, I think you can also extend yourself in a way that makes you way more porous and where you then become receptive and more susceptible to weird energies. I
yeah.
think the same holds true for the opposite when you become too solid. I think this is beautifully portrayed in the book Trauma and the Soul by Donald Kalschat, who's a Jungian therapist. And he basically understood that there's a self care system, like a protective system, that tries to shield like the inner child, archetypal child, with protective forces. And basically, he frames it as well. When what traumas is that if it solidifies and you have it so tight and basically it becomes so tight that now life cannot touch it anymore. Now you're
Mm,
disconnected from life in a different way. It's protective and at the same time it attacks the very condition of life itself, right?
mm,
Undermining that. And I
yeah.
think
Yeah.
there is danger in that too. And I think it's just, it's the balancing out of how solid am I and how thinly spread am I? And I think both can be bad and dark places to land at. If we, again, go into the both extremes, becoming too porous just invites in weird energies and becoming, in a way, too solid, not flexible enough, makes you just, well, life force just can't run through you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about when I worked in, Vegas and social work, and
Yeah.
I dealt with people that I would
Boy, what a
say
what a place to do social work.
I
Really,
mean, it was and no
lots of
training.
respect, Trey.
When I say social work, I want to be very clear to anybody listening. I was not a trained social worker. I was uh, a modern dancer that was just passionate about trying to help people, and so we started just feeding the poor. And before long, we had thousands of people showing up, and we had a center. People dropping off. It grew into something that I was not really ready for necessarily, but I had an open heart and I wanted to help. And we started doing intakes and basically just questionnaires and talking to people about these things. And I had a spiritual proclivity towards asking questions about the mystical and looking at this stuff. But what started to happen was I started to notice, and at the time I didn't use this vocabulary, but these archetypal eruptions or these possession states in which people would be in a state where they would say things they couldn't have possibly known or use different voices that it wasn't theirs or go into these. I had one lady one time was just talking to me right in the middle of a conversation, was like, I can't stay here. And I was like, what's going on? She's like, the voices is telling me I have to leave. And I was like, well, do you want to leave? She's like, no, I want to stay. And as we continued, she started to have all of these different types of energies. And this, I mean, that's what ultimately led me to want to get a PhD in transpersonal psychology and to study this stuff because of all the hundreds of experiences that I had. But back to what we were saying, a lot of the people that would come through being in the disenfranchised state, maybe lacking a lot of the the fundamental childhood development and the framing of being able to understand those constraints of the boundaries of these energies and having this weakened ego. You would see these things that just begin to flow through people and they would just begin to kind of latch on and then just and it was so readily, like you would see it just sporadically.
Yeah, it's like
um
hooks. It's like hooks. They cling onto them. Yeah.
and they cling on to, and it's, yeah, because I think it's the unexamined life, when people don't know the parts of themselves, it creates these hooks, but it creates these burdened parts within. And I think that is the interesting thing. We're not gonna go too deep into it, but I do think that is the interesting thing with the burdens of a part and what that opens up to as far as other energies that will attach to those things. I think pragmatically or practically speaking, I like what I think it was Robert Falconer said. It's like pragmatically, no matter what the energy is, it's like you work with it kind of the same as far as like the fundamental difference is like you don't want to work with an unattached burden. You don't want to ever try to like tell a part to leave. Like that would be the one caveat. That would be, the difference. But, that being said, I do think that there's an interesting relationship to what we're talking about with the ego, the constraints, the porousness and the parts of understanding how to hold all of those things together and understand which like how those things are formulating together and like what's kind of binding that in a sense.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in the experiences of Bob, like Bob Falconer. And I have tremendous amount of respect for his work. Also, like I've had beautiful healing sessions with him as well. And one thing I know what Bob constantly says when encountering these weird energies is that they basically live off and feed off fear. So when you can attend to your parts that fear that weird energies and make them feel seen and safe, those weird energies in a way start to lose their powers, which is obviously easier said than done. And I think
Hmm.
it's an art to deal with that. But fundamentally, it rings true to me and it maps onto my own experiences with these energies in clients and in my own life trajectory, that understanding that. And again, I come back to this quote by Jung, which I think he nailed it. And he's saying, the spirit of evil is the negation of life force by fear. And I think it's true. I think fear just cuts that off. And if we can be with courage and boldness in a way, I think we have life force on our side.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're talking about this. I know this is a really kind of a vulnerable thing to discuss, but also like or like publicly and whatnot. But what I find interesting about it, regardless of what anybody's opinions are on things or their own phenomenological experiences, I do think that it's interesting to me. Even you know with Richard Schwartz, kind of publicly starting to talk about these guides or these different energies that have been present in his whole IFS career. He's talked about it. It's like these have always been here. I've always had these experiences with clients and people that I've worked with, but he's just now starting to kind of talk about this publicly. I think he wanted to get the main bulk of like the therapeutic process of what it can offer, making sure that wasn't pushed away unnecessarily. But I think now that it's kind of established in what it is and all the other stuff that we've talked about in this podcast, I think there's enough stuff to kind of at least start to openly and honestly peel these conversations back in these spaces, because I think that this is what I'm talking about more specifically. It's like having a developed grammar with a lot of this, I think is very important, because it's like the more we can develop the grammar, the more that we can have conversations like this and explore in a very non authoritative way.
Yeah.
It's a very curious, like for me, it's like I approach it that way. I think we can begin to hopefully continue to allow spaces to emerge and collective
Yeah.
field. Because ultimately, what I find and what I found from the past is that the best healing is going to happen within the collective spaces. In these energies, it's like being able to have not
Well,
just therapeutic.
they're the most potent ones. Like in both senses, I think they can be high risk and high reward at the same time. I think this is one of the reasons why on I think in ayahuasca trips you get a lot of these weird energies, because it is specifically in that group kind of setting. So I
Mm,
think if the energies are right, if that container is right, there's enough self energy there, I think it can be an absolutely transformative experience. And I would say one of the most meaningful healing experiences I've had, not one of the most experience, a lot of healing experiences I had in group spaces. But because of all the vulnerabilities around there, it's also potent in another way. If you can't keep that container, if you don't build that container, I think it can backfire and backlash in a very, very dangerous way as well. And we should
yeah.
be aware of that.
Well, would you say then, though, that that's not necessarily building the container? Like, when I think about that, and I've been in spaces like what you're talking about,
Yeah,
I think that that happens from the lack of awareness of the construction or experience. Because I've known people that have
I
been like, "Oh,
agree.
I'm building a container," but you're like, "Do you know what that means?" Like, it's like
Yeah,
you're adopting a language about that, but do you actually like know what that means to do that and like how that actually works? Because I mean, I think about with the center that we had, like what started happening was that it was not a therapeutic moment of let's dig into your psyche. It's like people are walking into the room having these disturbances within this
yeah,
space that we had. And
yeah,
that always stuck with me because I was like, this is not about, this is not causal. It's not me saying anything to elicit. There's something being provoked that is, and you could make the argument on, listen, if you're there, there's no argument to be made. Like this stuff doesn't track like other than a conscious field. There's no other way of really discussing this or talking about this. And so like that stuck with me, and that continues to stick with me because I think, if you are somebody that's been in these spaces or done this type of work, and shamans know this, it's like they're not looking with the lens in which most people are looking. It's like
yeah,
you're participate you're sensing it in a different way. And so what I hear you say, it's like I actually see it's like, well, that might come from the lack of initiation, the lack of understanding, the lack of grammar, then traditions, and being able, which would then transfer into our studies. And how are you going to set up a study on this if you don't have the initiatory type? And there's just so much it begins to cascade down that, yeah, I'm just excited because I think this is something that's part of my dharma of like really being passionate about discussing this and uh, uh, yeah, having it come into not just the new age spaces or other
yeah.
spaces,
And
but really
and
mainstream.
I talked and I think we both talked off camera about this. Also, the responsibility that we care by doing such formats like podcasts and stuff, right? It's in a sense, it is a little bit like these UB stuffs. It can be disembodied in a way if we're not careful with it, because people can just take those, I don't know, an hour and 20. condense it into some kind of from information, take it like some spiritual paracetamol, and think
Mm,
that I have the answer now. Again, that's why I think we have to be cautious around these kinds of formats, and I'm aware of that whenever I try to be aware of that whenever I go onto such thing as a podcast, being aware of the impact it might have of people, especially when it comes to these weird topics that we're discussing, where I would really caution like and say, okay, get your basics first. Get them straight first. Like, if you want to jump onto UB stuff, well, get your IFS model straight first.
yes,
Be with
100%. Yeah.
parts first
Yep.
before you jump on onto stuff like that. Because again, I guess I do have parts that are cautious around.
I completely agree with that, and I think that that is I see this so often where the West, it's like we want to jump so deep into whatever the most like intense experience is. If you're gonna go do something, it's like, oh,
It's part of the legacy. It's part of the legacy.
yeah, and again, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom, and for me, it was hard-earned wisdom of having to be in these spaces and see like, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing. And you speak of fear, and what's really interesting about the spaces that I've seen and been in, especially working with this stuff, is like there would be energies and people where I'm working with them that seem to almost intimately know me in that sense, like what I was afraid of and what I was holding, and could just like sense it immediately and call it out. And then what's crazy is you go in, and I've done this numerous times where you almost flippantly go into places and you're like, okay, whatever. But then you see what it feels like to get into those spaces and you're like, this is confusing or this is hard. Like, and it disorients, and it's like, and I'm grateful that I've been able to kind of make it through that and come out to the place I am today. But looking back, I did a lot of stuff ignorantly, and I just jumped in, and I was like, wow, I underestimated a lot of things thinking, "Oh, this would be whatever." And so if anything from this podcast, I think watching it would be the opposite of, like, holding it with this sense of curiosity, being able to, like,
Exactly. Exactly. That's
yeah,
what I just wanted to say. How about we just invite curiosity into that
yep,
space?
yeah, 100%. And I think that might be the place to wrap it up on, because
Well, in a way, there is just way more we don't know than we know, and we can't, and that too can give us solid ground, like
yes,
the unknown, right? So I do think curiosity would be a really good thing, and instead of jumping to answers, maybe ask questions. So I would
yeah,
really invite people to become curious around that as much as they can and ask questions.
yeah. Well, and my whole goal and the whole feeling I had towards this, and when I've heard you and John talking, it was truly like, I would love, like, I just want to continue to see the curiosity go into these type of spaces, because I think it needs to we can stay in certain spaces, and that's good, but like I find myself doing this a lot in a lot of these conversations where I'm like, okay, well, what about this angle, like what about this perspective, this lived experience, where maybe the people you know, haven't had that lived experience, or maybe the shamanic experience or the therapeutic side of it, and wanting to infuse that into the conversation to allow not only us, but whoever else is listening or whoever else is participating in this conversation to just continue to allow that to open up and be a part. And I think Bob's been doing like, from what I've seen, I think his work is kind of in the same way, where he's throwing things out there of like, hey, let's look at this, and this is important to acknowledge. And I sense what he's talking about, what Dick Schwartz's movie, it is the part of the cultural evolution that we're a part of right now. And I think it's going to grow. I think out of necessity, it's going to grow. That's just my own intuition on it, where it's going to
Well,
continue to grow.
I would say it resonates with my intuition and instincts, and I think this is part of what John calls the advent of the sacred, and I think that's the beautiful thing about crises in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
also opportunities, and
You
there's a
break it up.
chance. to break it up, and there's a momentum here. And maybe if we can be curious, cautious, and bold, and courageous at the same time,
Yeah.
well, maybe something good can come out of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I want to say that I want to honor and appreciate this to you is the fact that I loved, even when we were approaching doing this conversation, the intuition, the awareness, the way you went about approaching it. I appreciated that so much, and just facilitating that type of conversation to me, that's the world I want to live in, where I have interactions and relationships where people are in tune with that. And so I just want to say, like, I you live what you talk, and you practice these things, and you present yourself on and off camera that way, and I think that's really admirable. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Trey. I really appreciate your words, and I think it goes both ways. And I hold you very, you know, dear to my heart, and I consider you as a friend, and I want to keep having those conversations and those embodied and enacted ways of, again, really embodying and practicing what we're preaching. I hope I mean, I have no intention of preaching anything, but I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to, well, yeah, it makes me a little, I want to be true to what I experience and what I bring into this world and space. And I don't want to, you know, have those performative contradictions. And well,
Yeah.
I guess that's that.
Well, I appreciate this conversation. I would love to, we'll definitely continue to talk and have you on again sometime, and then we'll see see how things unfold. So thank you
Thank you for the
again.
yeah.
I
Thanks,
really
Trey.
enjoyed
Thanks for
this.
the invitation.
Absolutely. Hey guys, before you go, if I could ask you one quick favor. If you enjoyed this video and you got something from it, I would sincerely appreciate it if you would like and maybe subscribe to the channel. Every bit of engagement helps. And in the meantime, if you're curious to check out more content like this, maybe check out this video or that video. Yeah, that's a good one.